There is a 200-year-old law in biology that says bone grows toward pressure. It is one of the most verified principles in all of orthopedic science. And right now, millions of teenagers are using it to justify hitting themselves in the face. What they don't know, and what almost no one is talking about, is that there are two completely different biological responses to mechanical stress on bone. One of them builds, one of them destroys. And we are going to follow both of them, all the way down to the cellular level. In the next 13 minutes, we will dissect 3 of the biggest myths in Looksmaxxing, Ballmaxing, mewing, and the dangerous turn toward Hardmaxxing. Bone is not stone. It is living tissue, constantly torn apart and rebuilt every single day by 2 competing populations of cells. Osteoclasts dissolve old or damaged bone matrix. Osteoblasts synthesize new bone in its place. Under normal conditions, this cycle is balanced, and your skeleton stays structurally stable. But when bone experiences mechanical stress, the kind that comes from exercise, from biting force, from controlled orthodontic pressure, something shifts. Osteoblasts are recruited to the site. New matrix is deposited. The bone grows denser, more aligned, more resistant to future load. This is Wolff's law, formalized in 1892, and it is real. The key word is controlled. The stress has to be applied within a specific range, at a specific rate, with recovery time between sessions. Because underneath the bone itself, surrounding every long bone and facial bone in your body, there is a thin membrane called the periosteum. It is the command center. It contains the stem cells that become osteoblasts. It carries the blood vessels that feed bone repair. It regulates the entire remodeling response. We will come back to what happens to the periosteum when you do not follow those rules. Bone smashing is a practice circulating on forums and short-form video platforms in which young men strike their cheekbones, jaw, and brow with their fists or solid objects, sometimes hundreds of repetitions per session. The logic is that blunt trauma will trigger Wolff's law, that the bone will interpret the impact as a signal to grow denser and more defined. Here is what actually happens. When uncontrolled blunt force hits a bone, the periosteum is the first structure to respond, and not in the way the forums claim. The trauma ruptures small vessels within the periosteal membrane, producing what is called a periosteal hematoma. The area floods with inflammatory mediators. Macrophages arrive to clear damaged tissue. Depending on the severity, the repair process follows 2 possible paths: controlled healing or fibrotic scarring, in which connective tissue replaces bone tissue rather than bone replacing bone. There is no peer-reviewed study demonstrating that self-administered blunt facial trauma produces controlled cortical thickening. The 2024 scientific report study on periosteal stimulation used calibrated mechanical protocols under laboratory conditions, not fists. The mechanism Looksmaxxers are invoking is real. The application they are using to invoke it is not the same thing. Mewing is the practice of holding the tongue pressed flat against the roof of the mouth, with the claim that sustained pressure will widen the palate and reshape the mid-face over time. The mid-palatal suture is the growth plate of the upper jaw, the zone where the 2 halves of the maxilla meet. In children and early adolescents, this suture is open, pliable, and actively growing. Orthodontists have used this window for decades to widen narrow palates with appliances delivering sustained forces. But the suture closes. Progressively through adolescence, the mid-palatal suture undergoes interdigitation. The 2 sides of the bone develop interlocking ridges that fuse into one solid structure. By the early 20s, in most individuals, no amount of soft tissue pressure will open it. The 2024 narrative review published in the International Orthodontics Journal examined why maxillary skeletal expansion succeeds in some adults and fails in others. The conclusion was not that gentle tongue pressure works. It was that even MARPE, meniscrew-assisted rapid palatal expansion, which delivers surgical anchor forces up to 80 newtons directly into the bone, produces unpredictable results in adults with fused sutures. The tongue generates approximately 1 to 2 newtons of force. The suture is not listening. What children's sutures are still open and pliable, actively responding to mechanical force. But once interdigitation completes in early adulthood, that joint is locked. No amount of tongue pressure can reopen it. What the jaw does respond to is repetitive, asymmetric mechanical loading applied to the temporomandibular joint. The same repetitive clenching and pressure that mewing advocates recommend produces disc displacement, inflammatory synovitis, and in some cases, articular cartilage degradation, a condition that does not reverse when you stop the practice. But here is the part of this story that almost no one is telling. The bones were the beginning. The endocrine system is where this gets serious. When the soft interventions fail, and for most people, they fail, Looksmaxxers escalate. The forums have a name for the next level, Hardmaxxing. And Hardmaxxing, for a significant portion of this community, means hormones. Let us start with a practice that has zero published evidence. Not one peer-reviewed study, not one mechanism paper, not one case series. When the face refuses to change, the obsession doesn't disappear. It migrates. It pivots toward the one system that controls everything facial development couldn't deliver, hormones. The practice is Ballmaxing, self-administered testicular massage, performed under the belief that mechanical stimulation of the testes will increase testosterone production by upregulating LDL receptors on Leydig cells. The Leydig cell theory is partially real. These cells do produce testosterone using cholesterol as a substrate, and LDL receptors are involved. But the idea that manual compression of the testicular parenchyma selectively upregulates receptor expression in Leydig cells without damaging the surrounding seminiferous tubules has no experimental support whatsoever. The literature simply does not contain this experiment. We are not saying it was studied and disproven. We are saying it was never studied, which, in evidence-based medicine, means it does not exist as a valid intervention. Then there is the intervention that does have evidence, extensive evidence, and the evidence is not good. Anabolic androgenic steroids, synthetic testosterone and its derivatives, are being introduced into the Looksmaxxing pipeline as a legitimate optimization tool. The rationale is that elevated androgens will accelerate jaw development, increase muscle mass, and improve the facial features associated with high testosterone. Here is what the hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis looks like when anabolic steroids enter the picture. Your brain monitors circulating testosterone through two regulatory centers, the hypothalamus, which releases ENRH, and the pituitary, which responds by releasing LH and FSH. LH signals the Leydig cells to produce testosterone. FSH drives spermatogenesis. The system is a feedback loop. When testosterone is high, ENRH and gonadotropin production are suppressed. Introduce exogenous testosterone or a synthetic androgen. The hypothalamus reads elevated androgens and shuts down ENRH. The pituitary goes quiet. LH and FSH drop to near zero. The testes receive no signal. Leydig cell activity ceases. Spermatogenesis collapses. This is not a rare side effect. It is the mechanism. Every person who takes anabolic steroids experiences HPTA suppression. The question is not whether it happens. It is whether the axis recovers when they stop. A 2023 scoping review published in Endocrine Connections examined physical, psychological, and biochemical recovery from anabolic steroid-induced hypogonadism. The finding was that recovery is highly variable, dependent on baseline testicular function, duration of use, the specific compounds used, and, critically, age at first exposure. That last variable matters more than anything else in this story. Adolescence is not just a developmental window for bone, it is the primary organizational window for the neuroendocrine system. The hypothalamus is actively calibrating its sensitivity to gonadal hormones. The pituitary is establishing the feedback thresholds it will use for the rest of the individual's life. Introduce supraphysiological androgens during this calibration period, and you are not just suppressing the axis temporarily, you are potentially altering the set points it is establishing. The 2013 study on adolescent anabolic steroid exposure published in Hormones and Behavior documented that androgenic steroid use during puberty produces lasting changes in neuroendocrine trajectory. And there is a second mechanism specific to males. Testosterone aromatizes to estradiol. Estrogen, signaling through estrogen receptor alpha in the growth plates, is the primary driver of epiphyseal senescence. Growth plate closure. Supraphysiological androgen levels in an adolescent male accelerate this process, potentially terminating linear growth years earlier than it would have ended naturally. Some Looksmaxxers take anabolic steroids specifically to grow taller. They may be doing the opposite. There is one more system being altered, and it is the most invisible of all. Body dysmorphic disorder is a psychiatric condition in which a person becomes preoccupied with a perceived defect in their appearance, a defect that is either absent or minimally noticeable to others. It affects approximately 1.7% of the general population. Its onset is typically adolescent, and it is among the most distressing psychiatric conditions documented in the literature, associated with high rates of social withdrawal, functional impairment, and suicidal ideation. A 2024 study in research on child and adolescent psychopathology documented the peer relationship patterns in adolescents with body dysmorphic disorder. Reduced social integration, heightened appearance comparison, increased sensitivity to social feedback. Looksmaxxing communities are structurally optimized to trigger and sustain this comparison cycle. They are built around the concept that your current face is a problem, one that can be solved through sufficient optimization. The algorithm rewards content that creates dissatisfaction, followed by a proposed solution. The solution never arrives because the optimization target keeps shifting. The dissatisfaction is the product. A 2023 paper in Frontiers in Psychology found a positive correlation between social media use and body dysmorphic symptom severity in young people, with the effect particularly pronounced in males in appearance comparison environments. Looksmaxxing forums are, architecturally, appearance comparison environments running continuously. The irony at the center of this story is precise. The things Looksmaxxers actually want: defined bone structure, hormonal vitality, facial symmetry, skin quality, jaw definition, have documented, evidence-based pathways. Progressive resistance training increases bone density and testosterone via legitimate HPG axis signaling. Sleep. Deep, consistent sleep is when growth hormone is released, when bone remodeling is completed, when the endocrine system recalibrates. Sun exposure drives vitamin D, which is essential for calcium metabolism and testosterone synthesis. Proper orthodontic intervention in adolescence, when the sutures are genuinely responsive, does expand the palate and improve the airway. These are slow, unglamorous, and they require years. The forums want the cellular result without the cellular mechanism. And what they have built in its place is a system that injures the periosteum, degrades the temporomandibular joint, collapses the HPTA, and teaches the brain that its own face is an emergency. The face was never the problem. Think. Every system in your body has a story this deep. We just went inside the bone, the jaw, the endocrine axis, and the brain, all because someone wanted a better face. Tell us, what do you want to go inside next? Drop it in the comments. Your answer becomes the next investigation. If this changed how you see your body, subscribe. We do not stop at the surface.